This is a recording of a lecture I presented a few days ago at East China Normal University in Shanghai. It's obviously an online lecture, and we decided to post it because some of our viewers requested that we do so. And the lecture presents my understanding of Daoist philosophy, specifically of the philosophy of the Zhuangzi. And as you will notice, this understanding is somewhat different from what you usually find in Western representations of Daoism, because I do not focus on the mystical or on the metaphysical side of the philosophy, but I try to contextualize it in Chinese intellectual and also general Chinese history, and try to show how it reacts to Confucian philosophy and specifically critically reacts to it. So this basically shows my view of Daoist philosophy from a historical and sociopolitical perspective. I hope you enjoy the talk.
And thanks a lot for having me and allowing me to speak to the community here. And it would be great to get some feedback afterwards. The title of my presentation, Civilization and Its Unease, as some of you can tell, probably it's an allusion to one of the major works of Sigmund Freud, Civilization and Its Discontent. And what I'm going to try to do today is to look at Daoism, specifically at the Zhuangzi, so to speak, through a Freudian lens, and try to uncover what I regard as maybe the basic project of the Zhuangzi, namely some form of dealing with the unease that is produced by civilization, which is exactly what Freud was doing. And I have to say, the theme of the talk is somewhat influenced by Dan's PhD thesis, which is also on civilization in an early Chinese philosophical context. Now, I'm going to try sharing the screen now. If anyone would ask me to indicate somehow the general difference between Western and Eastern philosophy, or between Western and Chinese philosophy, I normally hesitate to answer this question because I think the question is too general. But still, if we want to give some form of tentative answer to that question, I'd like to answer it in this way. What we see in early Greek philosophy, especially in Plato, Allegory of the Cave, but also in many other philosophers, and then throughout from the Greek beginnings throughout the history of European philosophy, is a major emphasis on the distinction between truth and appearance, right? So the idea is that most people can't really distinguish very well between truth and appearance. So that's why we need philosophers, because philosophers are good at exactly that. They can distinguish what is actually true from what is not. And that is, so to speak, their professional quality. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't existent in China. It is as well, but there's a somewhat different emphasis in early Chinese philosophy in, let's say, the job description of the philosopher. What do philosophers actually do? I think it's pretty clear that there's a strong emphasis on the distinction between order and disorder, between Zhi and Luan. In basically all early Chinese philosophies. Again, I'm not saying that this is not the case in Greece. I'm just saying it's a different emphasis here. And there are many passages in the text that basically prove this. One here, because I will be focusing on the Zhuangzi and on Daoism, is the start of chapter 33, the Tianxia chapter in the Zhuangzi, which is often considered the first kind of short history of Chinese philosophy, which gives an overview of several schools of thought. And the chapter begins with this sentence that you see in Chinese here: 天下者这方术者多矣. So that's the introduction of the chapter, and it basically means in English, as to the ordering of the world, there are many who have proposed different methods and techniques. So that's what philosophers do. They propose different methods and techniques for somehow bringing about order in the world. that's also, of course, then what we find already in the Laozi, in Daoism. There's also an emphasis on order there. And early on in the text, already in chapter 3, we find this paradigmatic proposition. Again, you can see the sentence here in Chinese and then in English, that the ordering of the sage consists basically in acting, non-acting, wei wu wei, and then nothing will not be ordered. So this is, of course, the main, or at least one of the main, but I would say in the Laozi probably the main maxim, philosophical maxim, wei wu wei, and it is explicitly characterized here right at early on in the text as a means to somehow bring about order. Now, of course, this is in the context of Daoism paradoxical, right? This non-action as a sagely form of government enables some sort of self-emerging and self-maintaining order, right? Some sort of ziraneran. So an order that establishes itself. So the ordering itself is just a passive allowing for order to emerge. But that should be well known. Now, what we see in the Zhuangzi, and I think that's typical for the Zhuangzi, that it basically takes certain maxims, certain ideas that are expressed very briefly in the Laozi, and then through stories, through allegories, sometimes through elaborate philosophical reflections, does something with these ideas and with these maxims. And you see the same thing, of course, throughout the text with Wu Wei, and also specifically with regard to the ordering of the world. So very early on, again, in the text, I've just chosen this. I could have chosen many other sections. We have a short dialogue between basically the Confucian sage rulers of old Yao and a Daoist kind of pseudo-historical sage ruler named Xu You. And in this story here again, we see this kind of distinction between the Confucian approach to order and then a Daoist approach to order, or rather the Daoist reaction to the Confucian proposal of ordering the world. So if you want to read through this short story here, I'll just follow the English translation. Yao, the sage emperor, was about to cede the rule of the world to Xu You, the Daoist sage, and said to him, if you are established as a ruler, the empire will be in order. But then Xu You says, you have already been ordering the world, and thus the world has already been ordered in a certain way. If I was to replace you, would I want to enact this name or role of ruler? The name or role is guest of the actual. Would I want to enact the guest? I have no use for empire making. So basically connecting again with the theme of Wu Wei, we have here in the Zhuangzi also an emphasis on non-action here in a practical way that Xu You refuses the offer to rule. Refuses to take on a political role, but he does so explicitly by saying and implying that somehow the Confucians have already ordered the world, and this makes it basically difficult or even impossible to go back to the Daoist situation where you can enact order through non-acting. So, and I think that theme that we see here in this story is something that we see throughout the Zhuangzi, and that's kind of builds up a framework for the point I'm trying to make in this presentation, namely that Daoism, specifically the Zhuangzi, reacts to the problems that that arose from the Confucian way of ordering, of Zhi Tianxia, of ordering the world, and that this poses a problem, and that Daoism reacts to this problem, as in this story here. Now, I want to look much more closely now at this Confucian concept of order, again, because I think this is what Daoism, and specifically the Zhuangzi, reacts to. And here I want to look at this paradigmatic story that we find in the Mengzi, famous passage here in Mengzi 3a. And I think that Zhuangzi reacts to this Confucian master narrative of political order as it is paradigmatically expressed here in this passage from the Mengzi. So I just have a few sentences from this relatively long passage. And so Mengzi points out here, again, you can see it, read it in Chinese, but I just follow the English translation. If there were no nobles, nobles is how I translated Zhuangzi here, then no one would order the savages, Zhi Ye Ren. And if there were no savages, wild people literally, no one would feed the nobles. So the nobles, the Zhuangzi, the Confucian Zhuangzi, have this function to order the uncivilized population. And then a little later, the passage goes on, as to the ordering or the governing of the world, those who labor intellectually order the others, and those who labor physically are ordered by the others. And those who are ordered by others feed those others. Those who order others are fed by those others. So in addition to the distinction between the Zhuangzi and the Yeren, between the nobles and the savages, we have basically the distinction between the intellectuals and the laborers. And the first are identified with the Confucians identify, of course, or the Confucian elite identifies with the Zhuangzi and intellectuals who have to order the others, and in so to speak, as a reward for this, the others feed them. Now, this is outlined in more detail in the same passage, and I think this is really very relevant here, where this process of the distinction between, or the bringing about of order in a state of uncivilized wilderness is step by step explained. So it's a process of ordering or civilizing. In modern Chinese, we would say maybe a sort of wenming process that the ancient sage rulers, according to Mengzi, completed. And we can distinguish three steps here. The first step is the ordering of nature. More specifically, the ordering of water, that is the rivers, in order to have to allow agriculture to function, right, through irrigation. So this is Zhi Shui. So the first rulers, they ordered the rivers and the waters in order to enable. So they ordered nature in order to enable agriculture. And then, as a second step, once this is being done, we have an ordering of all living beings, and this is what the passage I quoted earlier already speaks to. Or if we want to use Foucault's term, a form of biopolitics. So after the ordering of nature, we have an ordering of life, of living beings. And the first step is a separation between animals and humans, right? Again, the Yeren are very close to animals. So the first step is to make this, establish this distinction between different forms of life, animal life and human life. And then importantly, we'll get back to this, there is a second step where the animals are further divided into wild and domesticated animals. So some of the animals are sort of incorporated in the human realm and then become part of the human order. And then the human realm itself is also ordered by this distinction between the civilized and the barbarians. Again, the civilized who have domesticated animals, and the barbarians who are basically similar to the wild animals. So this biopolitical ordering is a second step. And then once we've achieved that, when we've laid, so to speak, the foundations for civilization, then the specific Confucian project sets in. The Zhi Ren, the ordering of human beings, and Mengzi points out in the passage, very famous passage, that this is how the Ren Lun, the role relationships, the 5 human role relationships were established. So you have the order between the genders. Gender order is the first thing, husband and wife, right? So the distinction between male and female within the civilized world becomes paramount. And then secondly, we have in addition to the gender order, we have a political order, the superiors and the inferiors, those who give orders and those who follow orders. And then in addition to that, we have an order between the generations. So we had first gender, then politics, then generational order, the parent and child distinction. And again, the child has to be in an obedient role serving the parents. And then in addition to that, within one generation, we have the distinction between older and younger, some form of age distinction, and eventually the friend-friend distinction. So these Ren-Lun set up an intricate, complex relationship order within the civilized Confucian, let's say, society. So it's a very complex ordering process that takes place here. Now, this ordering process, I think, is clearly the basis for the role of ritual. Ritual is the practice, Li, that not only establishes this order, but also maintains and celebrates and manifests and reenacts and enacts this order, both at court, so both in kind of political, but also pseudo-religious procedures, as well as in everyday life. So again, I could have these are all the Confucian texts are full of quotes. I just chose this one from the Xunzi, where it says that music unites and ritual separates. So of course, what order does? It unites and separates at the same time through establishing these relationships, whatever in the kinship group between the older and the younger generation and between the older and the younger siblings. You set up these distinctions, but in order to unite the kinship group as an ordered whole, as an ordered tung, as an he tung, and in ritual, these two functions become designated by music, yue, and by li, by the actual ritual performances. So it's a separation and the unity of these separated roles. And this is at the same time kind of a performative establishment of socio-political order. I regard this as kind of the basic program of this Confucian civilizational order. And then importantly, this is not just like an abstract order, but of course the core of this is eventually, and this is again what I think that the Zhuangzi reacts to, that what is demanded is a behavioral and emotional internalization of roles, right? So on the basis of this order, on the basis of Li and Ren-Lun, what eventually you need to do is you have to shape your identity. You have to shape who you are. Every individual becomes who they are by internalizing emotionally, intellectually, and by behaviorally and politically practicing this order. And this is what I think Roger Ames calls correctly a Confucian role ethics. But it's more than an ethics. It's a whole program for, let's say, it's existentially programming what it means to be human. And it's a civilizational program that incorporates not only moral, which is what role ethics points to, but also very importantly, political and existential dimensions of human life. So it's a totalizing ordering process that then makes individuals shape themselves in line with this order and make them realize this order, make them actualize this order in their life. And this is what I call, because it's so totalizing, what I like to call a regime of sincerity. Sincerity means a sincere commitment to your role identity, a sincere commitment to the place or the places you have in this order. Like think of the family, right? The core value of xiao, filial piety or family reverence, means that you sincerely commit to the role you have in the family unit. Thereby, you shape, you have a moral regime, a behavioral regime, a psychological regime, an emotional regime, a bodily regime, how you comport yourself, right? That is all serves the realization of this order. So this has the following three levels. It's a socially and political regime ordered by the separation of social roles. Then it's ideologically. We have all these narratives, these like the one in the Monks I referred to, right? It's a story that is a pseudo-historical story that then, so to speak, legitimizes this order in a historical narrative. Then, of course, we have all these role model stories where you see people who enact their roles in an exemplary manner and thereby show others how to internalize this and become part of this order. And then, of course, we have moral values like whatever Ren, Yi, Li, Zhi, and Xin or so that all support this order. And again, this leads then on the personal level to an identity formation by emulation and internalization of these role models that, again, represent the order. There's a moral domestication and discipline through this role commitment to the practice of xiao. And there's a conformity to roles in this whole Mingxing or Mingshi Zhengming program, right? Also the names, the names, roles, I like to translate Ming also as roles, because they refer to they basically the concrete kind of manifestations again of this order, right? The order is an order through names throughout all spheres of life. Now, again, I think the Zhuangzi basically responds to this regime of sincerity. And it's a kind of, I'd say, a detox. Again, my main point is a Freudian point, that this order, this civilization, produces a lot of, as I will later explain, I would say I prefer unease over discontent. So this ordering regime can be very stressful. It can produce all kinds of, again, discontent or unease. And I think the Zhuangzi responds to the pressures of this ordering regime of sincerity. Again, similar as to Freud's point in his treatise. So from a Daoist perspective, the regime of sincerity is potentially toxic. It's often suppressive, produces discontent and suffering, right? And this is the Freudian phrase, wen min ji qi bu an. It produces bu an. So many, if not most, narratives in the Zhuangzi can be read as Daoist counter-narratives to this Confucian regime of sincerity. So they counter this regime, and at the same time, they promote this kind of antidote, namely ease, by various means. So humor has a very important function, which shows the incongruity, the contingency of the names, of the roles attached to the names. It comes up with a lot of anti-role models, kind of subverting the authority of these role models. So it mixes good and bad characters, high and low rank, or reverses them. And then we have these historical reversals as well, right? Kind of revaluation of the historical stories or redescription of the historical stories, where the civilization process that the Confucians again and again outline as like a great success is described, on the other hand, as a barbarization process, as a failure. So it's undermining the legitimacy of the historical narrative. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, what is achieved by this, by these stories is enabling people to dissociate themselves from this regime, give them a break from the regime, instead of and releasing the pressures of the regime. Of course, it's also the psychological element here, that the humorous nature of the story provides some form of relief. And in this way, the sincere role commitment, right, in the regime of sincerity, is somehow dissolved. And it allows you, at least for a moment, to emotionally relax and to be non-committed. I want to point out a few stories here. The first one is the Gangster Zhi story, the Daoist story, which is basically not exactly a whole, but nearly a whole chapter 28 in the Zhuangzi. And you have to realize that this chapter is already mentioned as very few of the chapters by Sima Qian in the Shiji when he talks about the Zhuangzi. So there's every reason to believe that this chapter is one of the earliest chapters of the Zhuangzi, even though it is part of the Zapian, of the miscellaneous chapters. I consider it to be part of the historical core, as it is, in one of the earliest references we have to the Zhuangzi, or probably the earliest reference. This is identified as the core chapter of the Zhuangzi. So We have here this very strange character, the Dao Zhi, the Gangster Zhi, who is very exaggerated character, cartoonish character, at the same time extremely ambiguous, right? He's very incongruent. He's violent, but angry, but also very smart. He's very eloquent. He's good looking, then he's immoral, but he's also very well read, somehow very well educated. So all these ambiguities, these incongruities make him, and I think that's very important, not a role model. I think many of the Taoist stories are often misread because they were still read in the Confucian role model way, that, you know, we have the good guys and the bad guys, and the good guys are the role models that we have to follow. But I think Gangster Zhi is one of the many characters in the Zhuangzi who is specifically not a role model. He's neither a clearly good guy nor a clearly bad guy. He's some form of grotesque anti-hero. And at the same time, and this is a second important theme because it's exactly counters the Confucian master narratives, he comes up with these historical stories, but he's not really a historian. The history is kind of counter to the regular history. It's a complete kind of absurd reversal of the traditional historical narrative. So we also have this, he's also basically an anti-historian. And then thirdly, I think, and again, I think that's something that often, how the chapter is often misinterpreted. I think he's also clearly not an ideologist, like people like Graham or so, they say he's advocating a primitivist kind of Daoist political ideal. I don't think he's advocating anything because you can't take him straightforward as a serious ideologist, given all the incongruities of the story. So also the ideology he brings forth has something carnivalesque, has something grotesque, has something deeply ambiguous and ironic to it. And I want to look at a few passages from the Gangster Zhi chapter to illustrate what I'm saying. And this is the first one, is this anti-history that he comes up with. That is a reversal of the traditional Confucian civilization narrative. Again, you can look at the text in Chinese here, but I'll just read it in English. So in this anti-history, it begins with, like the normal history, the regular history begins with Shenong. And then for Robert Zhi, for Gangster Zhi, this is like it describes it in the following way. So he says, people slept where they happened to be and woke up cheerfully. So it's an age of ease. That's the whole point, right? So we have this state of ease at the beginning. We have this kind of state of xiao yao you. And then interestingly, and this is of course totally scandalous, and that's why I like this sentence, min zhi qi mu bu zhi qi fu. So they knew their mothers, but they didn't know their fathers. So there was no family structure. They had free sex, basically, right? And so that is totally countering the Confucian narrative that we saw in the Monzi, right? And nevertheless, that was the condition or the state of their ease, of their xiao yao you. And then again, importantly, totally anti-history to the Confucian ordering process. They lived side by side with a deer. So the animal-human distinction is also not being, supported. And then he says, but this was when utmost vitality, zhi de, I translate this as utmost vitality, was abundant. But then, of course, comes the downfall. Then comes the Yellow Emperor. And then, interesting, he slaughtered the native tribes out in the wild, right? So it's not that the Yeren get ordered. The Yeren get slaughtered instead. There's a genocide of the people who live in this state of ease. And their blood runs for 100 miles. And then Yao and Shun arise, and since then the strong have always oppressed the weak. Since Tang and Wu, everyone brought disorder to mankind. So it's again a total reversal of the story in the Monzi. And here we have the core character here, I highlighted it in red. We have Luan. Right? They're all people who bring disorder rather than order. So in this anti-history, the Confucian story becomes a violent disordering of this peaceful state of ease and bliss, right? So the civilization process is a process that that destroys ease and that creates violence and that creates suffering, right? So by establishing the family and by separating humans and animals. And the sage rulers are actually genocidal, oppressive people. And another passage also from the Dao Zhi chapter, again, I think clearly as a response to the Confucian name project, which supports the name role project, right, which is central to the ordering process. So again, Gangster Zhi says here, I read the English, now you with your slick words, he's speaking to Confucius here. It says to Confucius, you, Confucius, with your slick words and fake behavior, you con and hoodwink those in power because you're after their wealth and rank. So basically this corrupt, Confucius is a corrupt figure who establishes this order, as the monks said, in order to be fed by those who are being ordered, right? So the order is here from the perspective of the Zhuangzi, an order that is imposed by the powerful so that they can exploit the powerless. And so those without power. And so the robber Gangster Zhi goes on and says, there's no greater gangster than you. Why don't they call you Gangster Confucius instead of calling me Gangster Zhi? Right, so it's this reversal, this ironical reversal of the names that represent the order. So we have this. What the story does, it points out the incongruity of names and roles. It reverses good and bad and high and low. And in the story, actually, like in the first story that I mentioned in the Xiao Yao You chapter, it perfectly corresponds to which is the beginning, which is Neipian, right? It's this story here in this way perfectly corresponds to the story where Xu You refuses Yao's offer to rule, and for the same reasons, right? Gangster Zhi also refuses to rule because the Confucians, through their ordering, have already established this kind of corrupt order that makes it impossible to go back to and practice Wu Wei within it. Now, I want to give you a second example from a different chapter. This is from the Ma Ti chapter, as you can see here. And this is another figure who is often in all other texts seen as, and the Chinese listeners will know this person, Bo Le, who is like generally also respected as a great person who domesticated horses. So this second example is about the domestication process, which is also very central to the Confucian concept of order, as I said earlier, right? You separate animals from humans. And as a second step, you take some of the animals and domesticate them and make them serve the people. So, and that's what Bo Le represents. Bo Le represents the domestication of animals, the domestication of horses. And that's why he's celebrated in the Confucian text. But again, we see here in the Zhuangzi a total reversal of this. And again, I point to the text here. You can read the text. The Ma Ti chapter says, horses eat grass and drink water. They prance with their legs and leap. So they are in a state of xiao yao you. They're in a state of ease. That's their genuine nature. And even if they had grand towers and large dormitories, they would have no use for them. They don't want to be domesticated, right? That's what domestication means. It means to make someone live in a house or with a house. That's what the term means, coming from Latin, right? But they don't want to be domesticated. It's literally the same thing. They don't want to live in houses. And then Bo Le said, and he came and he says, I'm good at ordering and domesticating horses. That's what I'm good at, right? He's a philosopher. He's good at ordering, right? That makes him 我善之马, right? So he's in line with this kind of ordering program that we see in Confucianism and throughout early Chinese history. So ordering as domestication. And he singed and marked them, bridled and hobbled them, and confined them in stables and corrals. 2 to 3 in every 10 of them died. So it's the same thing. Instead of by civilizing them, he's killing them. Then he galloped them and raced them and made them go together in regular order. At their front were the evils of the bit and breastbands, and behind them were the terrors of the whip and switch. More than half of them died. So he kills them through this domestication process, through this training process, through this and this training process, this domestication process. In the same chapter, very literally, is in the end compared to the function of ritual. So let me get there with a few steps here on the next slide. So we see again in this story, Moeller, the reversal of hero and anti-hero, right? Moeller is normally a hero. He's here an anti-hero. We see a reversal of the ordering and disordering process, right? The ordering of the horses becomes a disordering, a killing of the horses. We see this reversal of good and bad, right? Nurturing becomes killing, which, by the way, is the same as I think in the Butcher and the Pao Ding story, but I'm not going to talk about this. So, and then the chapter ends basically with this sentence here at the slide, which is very crucial because it compares the domestication process to ritual. So again, ritual Li is and music is parallel to the domestication of horses that kills horses. So my point is, Moeller is not brought about here so that Zhuangzi is making a point of whatever animal rights. That's not the point. He's also not making the point of going back to a state of nature like Rousseau or everyone hugs trees or so. What this is basically is a critique of ritual that points out that that ritual, the regime of sincerity in ritual, is as brutal as the domestication of horses. So the sentence goes, then came the sages bending and twisting over ritual and music to reform the bodies of the world, right? It's this biopolitical process, dangling benevolence and righteousness overhead to comfort everyone's heart. And the people ended up struggling for profit. This, too, is the fault of the sages. 圣人之过也. And the third and final example is the Hundun story at the end of the inner chapters, right? So this is finally get to the, we had a few passages from the inner chapters, there's another one, but at the very end. And you will be familiar with this story. I hope it's one of the most famous stories in the Zhuangzi, where I read it very briefly. The emperor of the southern sea was fast. The emperor of the northern sea was quick. The emperor of the center was Hundun. Time and again, fast and quick had come to meet one another in Hundun's land. Since Hundun had hosted them most kindly, Fast and Quick planned on repaying Hundun's favors. All humans have 7 holes for seeing, hearing, eating, and breathing. He alone doesn't have these. Let's try and drill them. Each day they drilled a hole, and after 7 days, Hundun died. So, and this story too, I think, is a critique and is an ironical, satirical, but with a very bitter, dark humor, a critique of the regime of sincerity. It points out the deadly regime of sincerity. The emperors of the north and south, what they do is they try to integrate Hundun into their role relationship system. They want to make him like human. They want to give him the human face. They want to make him part of this Renlun, of this Guanxi scheme, which is based on establishing a dependency through gift giving and hosting, right? So they met with Hundun, but the relationship wasn't formalized. It needs to be formalized through gift giving, right? This guanxi, this mutual bond, the relationship, the role relationship must be established through this act of gift giving. And then you have to repay the gift. You have to host, and someone is the host and someone is the guest. So these are these basic human relationships that Hundun, he just kind of didn't formalize this. So the formalizing of the hosting and the gift giving is the establishing of Renlun and of Guanxi, so to speak, a Confucianization of human relationships. And what they do is they give him a human face. They drill these 7 holes, the facial openings. So that's, again, it's a civilization process. The wild, the Ye-Ren Hundun is made into a proper human. So Hundun dies then by being not able to resist this kind of identification process, this role imposition process that is imposed onto him by the society around him, the society that surrounds him. So this imposition of the face corresponds, I think, to the emotional and behavioral identification that I talked about at the beginning of the lecture, right? That's the whole point. The order is not just an abstract order. It's something that every individual has to internalize. Everyone has to bore, to drill these holes in their face and internalize this order and make it their personality, make it their life experience. So this emotional and behavioral identification through the regime of sincerity, I think that's what the Hundun story represents. And in line with all these other stories that I mentioned earlier, it is described not as a process of refining someone, but as a process of killing someone. Just as Bo killed the horses, and just as the sage kings killed the Yeren, the rulers of the north and the south, they kill Hundun through this process. So what is the Taoist answer to this? Well, the Taoist answer is an emphasis on ease. And I think the core terms are xiao yao yo, or yo is a term, right? Yo and xiao yao yo to yo. And of course also an, right? So these are, but yo is more important even than an. And so again, like in connection with Freud's description of civilization as something that inevitably produces discontent, or rather actually unease. Again, the German term is Unbehagen. I'll get to this later again, probably, which I think is much better translated with Bu-an rather than Bu-man, as it's usually, that translates discontent. But I think the original German is closer to unease. So civilization produces this Bu-an, and it makes it very difficult to be in a state of xiao yao yo. So what the Zhuangzi tries is to enable human beings in this civilization that we cannot escape, nevertheless, against all odds, experience something like an, experience something like xiao yao yo. And yo occurs like more than 100 times in the text. And I think it indicates a form of existential well-being and vitality, some form of this zhi de, which is not yet a moralized de, which is like a pure vitality, both intellectually and physically. So it's not going back to whatever, again, an absolutely primitive lifestyle. I think it's intellectual sharpness that's very important for this, often together with others. So it's also not something, I'm against this interpretation of Daoism as something where, you become someone, a hermit who leaves society and live alone on a tree or something like this. The examples in the Zhuangzi are very often examples of people together with others, and the xiao yao yo is something that you not just do on your own. But you escape the rigid role expectations. And there are a few paradigmatic stories about this. Again, I read the Haoliang Zhebian story, the happiness, the fish story in this way, and I read the relationship between Zhuangzi and Huizi generally in this way as an explanation of the kind of philosophical state of xiao yao yo and an intellectual form of an. But again, I'm not going into this here because I discussed it otherwise. And I think also the very famous Zhuangzhou Mengdia story, the butterfly dream story, expresses this state of xiao yao yo and an. I will point not to these very famous stories, but to a different story, and to explain this from the Tianzi Fang chapter, which is in the Waipian. But again, the stories that I mentioned earlier, like the butterfly dream story, is in the Napian. And I think these stories correspond to one another. And this story is very explicit, very clear. It's not very allegorical, and it puts it very clearly, the whole notion directly in a socio-political context, which is what I'm getting at, because I think the Zhuangzi is about achieving an in civilization, in the concrete political, social pressures that every one of us has been experienced every time, because we're all in civilization. So the short story is like this, goes like this: Jian Wu asked Sun Shu Ao, "You were three times chief minister and didn't feel elated. You weren't really happy about it. You were 3 times dismissed. You were fired from that position. You weren't sad about it. How does your mind work? 色之用心, right? how do you do this? You're special, right? But then Sun Shao replies, no, I'm not really special. I'm not really different from others. I don't really surpass others. When the position came to me, it couldn't be rejected. When it was taken away, it couldn't be retained. I couldn't do anything about it. I considered that getting or losing it, the position, wasn't up to me and no occasion for sorrow. That was all. Moreover, I didn't know whether the honor belonged to me or to the position or to myself. If it belonged to the position, it was nothing to me. If it belonged to me, it had nothing to do with the position. What leisure have I to care about whether others regard me as of high or low rank? So again, this story brings up a lot of themes and connects with it that we heard earlier, but it at the same time expresses the achievement of this state of ease, this state of an, or xiao yao you. It's about the contingency and fluidity of roles. I think in analogy to the butterfly dream story, this is about wuhua, about the transitoriness of things, right? Things come and go. You get a job, you lose a job, things like this, and this is some form of wuhua, some form of transitoriness of things, shifting things. So that's important. That Sun Shao kind of affirms the wuhua, that he's capable of affirming that kind of Nietzschean yes saying to this. And then at the same time, and this is very important, he understands the incongruity of social roles, ranks, names, positions, right? The Confucian regime asks you to not to disregard this. The roles are absolutely defining who you are. The Ming is definitive. And for like in these other passages in the Zhuangzi, for Sun Shao, the Ming is not defining. It's not defining him. It's completely contingent, right? He doesn't know if the honoring is due to the Ming or to him as a person, right? And if it's due to the Ming, then it's arbitrary that here it is. If it's due to him, then the Ming doesn't matter. So it's again a sort of ridiculing and of taking the Ming seriously, which is of course still central to Chinese cultures, that we're all obsessed with Ming, right? So he does, in a certain sense here, identify with positions. He takes the job repeatedly. It's not that he goes to the wilderness. He's not a hermit, right? He's not avoiding society. There's no escapism. But, and this is the point, he doesn't over-identify with his roles. Understanding their contingency, he accepts the contingency of social order. And that again means he does not internalize the role identity. He doesn't become a Hundun, but he achieves flexibility and he achieves maintaining at ease. And I think really this is the core kind of therapeutic message of the Zhuangzi. Again, in line with Freud, how against all odds achieve ease within the unease produced by the civilizational pressures. And this is a final slide. I was supposed to speak about an hour, and I think I'll just manage to do that. Which is about genuine pretending, as Dan mentioned at the beginning. That is in the subtitle of our book. The notion actually Paul's notion, Huang's notion. He came up with it in his PhD thesis, and it's the core for our understanding of the philosophy of the Zhuangzi, and it connects to all the themes that I was talking about earlier. So the key to achieving ease, you or an, is the insight into the existential condition of genuine pretending. Everyone is genuine pretending all the time, and that's something that the Zhuangzi acknowledges. So the first point, which I mentioned already, I'm just repeating here, is that all identities, for instance, human roles and ranks within the Renlun, but also the ranks in higher and lower rank in society, in a regime of sincerity, are contingent and incongruent, right? And we saw this in the first passage from the Xiao Yao You chapter, with Xu You talking. This is the quote from there: "Mingzhe, Shizhe Bingye." It's just the guest of reality. So the name. This is pointing out the contingency, the temporality, right? Guests come and go of the and you come and go into social positions And that's the case. And therefore, you shouldn't internalize it too much. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be the guest, but you should know that you're just a guest in the role that throughout your life, all the time, you're a guest of all the roles you're playing, right? And that's understanding genuine pretending. That's this next point. Identity is performed in conformity to social expectations. It's pretended. Roles are pretending in English also means playing, like in child play, you pretend whatever to be whatever you make child play, and then you play whatever, pretend to be a king or a queen or something like this. So roles are always played, right? That is the insight. Roger Ames says the Confucian program is to make people not just merely play their roles, but be their roles. And this is precisely what the Zhuangzi responds to. The Zhuangzi says, no, we're always just playing our roles. That's what society makes us do. We're always the guests of the roles, of the names and of the roles, and we're playing them. So nevertheless, within this playing the roles, we can achieve some form of genuineness. The genuineness when experienced when enacting or taking on a social identity role is not anchored in a true self. There is a fei wo or wu san wo, the phrases from the Zhuangzi. But nevertheless, we can, and we're not hermits. We're not running away from society. The point is not to avoid civilization. It's impossible to avoid civilization. The point is to play a role in, and to play it genuinely in such a way that you can be at ease in your role as a student, in your role as a mother, in your role as a politician or whatever. The point is not to do that, but just like Sun Chuao, to achieve a state of ease. And if you're able to achieve that, if you're at ease as a student, then the teacher will be at ease. If you're at ease as a teacher, the student will be at ease. If you're at ease in a political superior position, then those inferior will be at ease. If the inferiors are at ease, the superiors will be at ease. So and the way to achieve this ease is to understand the contingency of the role. It's by not over-identifying with your role that you can achieve ease, and not only for yourself. It's not an individualist program, but you can make a kind of a social context more at ease. So again, this is a final sentence. The insight into genuine pretending as the existential condition of social identity enables ease and enables us to cope with the inevitable discontent, or the Unbehagen again. As I said, Unbehagen is the Freudian German term, and that's Bu-an. It's not really Bu-man. It's the better translation would be Bu-an. In the civilized, ordered society that we inevitably inhabit. Okay, this was the last slide. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Professor Moeller. That was fantastic. So now we are entering in the question and answer period. I noticed, it seems like the only messages we got in the chat box were advertisements. But I think maybe people were waiting for the end of the lecture before they typed in any questions.
No, I was
Rory,
going to ask
sorry,
a
did
question.
you want to say something?
I was going to ask a question if nobody else has a question.
Yeah.
To get things started. Well, thank you very much, Georg, for a brilliant lecture. And this is probably quite a boring question, one that you have probably got a lot before. But I'm just wondering about the term existential, as opposed to, say, prolific or identity, right? Concerning identity. So, and I'm thinking about it in terms of relationships with others. Let's say, like, familial relationships, or relationship between, say, wife and husband, or, romantic partners, or these kind of close relationships. Is it necessary to draw a distinction? Because it seems to me like two, different categories. Say if we think about the official who was promoted and fired 3 times, I think it was, and was at ease perfectly with each promotion and firing. This is in terms of your identity or your role, right? But then,
Yes.
and I know there is there's the passage in the Zhuangzi with, actually maybe I've forgotten, but is it Huizi's wife dies, right? But
No, Zhuangzi's
this,
wife, yes.
Zhuangzi's wife dies. Okay, yeah. This is something to do with relationships. So that seems to me
Right.
like, a different challenge, maybe, right? Ethically, existentially, to something concerning role or identity profile. So I'm just wondering about that distinction, if that's clear.
I think it's a very good question, Rory, and you pointed already to the passage that I was thinking of before you brought it up, because that's the paradigmatic passage, right, where Huizi, Zhuangzi's best friend, condoles him after Zhuangzi's wife had died, and Zhuangzi is playing an instrument and singing, very, very famous story. And then Huizi says, are you crazy or what? And like, it's from a Confucian perspective. I mean, Huizi is not a Confucian, but he expresses this kind of general cultural expectation that he should be not only very sad, but he should also display this mourning through ritualized mourning behavior, which is at the center, of course, of Confucian ritual, right? The mourning ritual is the most important. And it again shows the internalization of the roles. And as you rightly said, Rory, of course, probably the deepest internalization of a role is in our intimate relationships, right? From a Western perspective, it's about the romantic partner. But from a Confucian perspective, the most intimate relationship is between parents and children. But anyways, and of course, that's so scandalous. And even for Westerners, right, this is kind of scandalous that that you sing and dance once your wife has died. But of course, the point is exactly the same. And it's much more difficult to accept the transitoriness of these roles because they go so much closer to our heart. But again, also and again, I mean, I took a Freudian framework here from the perspective of psychological ease, from the perspective of mental health. It is extremely important that you can let go, and that's of course the most difficult thing, and it's psychologically extremely difficult, and it's culturally inappropriate, and yet it is needed. It is absolutely needed to be able to achieve ease, and not only for yourself. If you're not able to move on, you cannot socialize. It's impossible to have a society that functions. It's impossible to enter another relationship with another human being, right? If you're incapable of achieving ease because you lost a loved one. So that makes that's why it's existential. That it goes at the deepest existential level. It's not a socio-political question anymore, right? So it's a deeper personal experiential level when you talk about the relationship to your loved ones and someone passing away. And then you're unable to dissociate from your role. And yet it is essential for mental health and social health that you are able to dissociate from your role.
Thank you very much for that answer. I see there are a few questions in the chat, so I don't want to take up too much time. So, but just one more question
why don't we
about
go?
that.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
okay.
No,
Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
no problem.
No, go ahead. Keep it going.
Just about like because in the Confucian rites and rituals, you have relating to roles similar to, say, the hiring and firing, promotions and so on. But you also have, say, the 3-year mourning period, right? And
Right.
I guess this 3-year mourning period exists because it's difficult to move on, and because it's difficult socially to move on. So they have that 3-year mourning period.
Yes, but I mean, the interesting thing, if you actually read the passage in the Lunyu, right, where Confucius is talking with Zai Wa wants to shorten it to 1 year. One of the most central passages of the Analects. And then, of course, Confucius says, after Zai was gone, he's Bu Ren, which in Ames' translation, I think he's perverted, right? So Bu Ren is basically, he's not human, he's not humane, right? He's inhuman, he's not humane. So it's a very, very bad dismissal of this. But the interesting thing is how Confucius then justifies the 3-year mourning period. He says, when you were born, your parents cared for you for 3 years. You were entirely dependent. And now they're dead, and now they moved on to the spirit world, and you have to sacrifice for the spirits and so forth. They are dependent on your help. So the 3 years mourning period is just like we saw in the Hundun story. It's a reflection on the Confucian ethics of gift and re-giving. It's this essence of the guanxi. So there we see we see this kind of program, the programming, that also the family, the bond between the generations becomes part of this gift giving, a mutual dependency, right? It's this mutual dependency which becomes inescapable, becomes emotionally impossible, right? You're forced, and everyone in China feels emotionally forced to re-give gifts, right? It's a very strong emotional pressure, very strong social pressure. And that same psychological pressure is used in the most intimate relations, the strongest relationship in the Chinese context, parents and children, to enforce this regime of sincerity and to enforce this not being able to let go. Now, so it enforces dependency, inescapable dependency, which is, of course, at odds with the modern Western notion of education, which is supposed to turn dependence, that's what children are called, in formal language in America, into independent beings. That's a modern task of education, right? That means it's a form of enabling them to let go. So it's the opposite program that we see also there, right? That the mourning ritual is centerpiece of establishing this insurmountable bond of dependency that makes it impossible to let go. And that's problematic. That is problematic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, Georg, we have a few questions here in the chat box. So the first one, which I found kind of interesting, in one of the earlier slides, you translated the fang shu, and they're asking, is that the same as fang fa, or like method? And then interestingly,
yes.
ji shu, which is
yes.
either translated as technique or technology.
Exactly.
Which could be,
yes.
Well, I'll just explain it for the others watching. Technology can also be utilized as a word, which means, I don't know, maybe like social, well, in the case of this lecture, a civilizing process that civilizes people or orders people, right? But
yes, perfect.
Yeah, so they're asking, right, go ahead, sorry.
The answer is yes, very good. That's exactly how I understand it. Right? So these are methods and techniques in the Greek sense for ordering. Yes, exactly. Fangfa, and that's what it meant. Yes.
Yeah, and then okay, so then the next question is the ideal for Ruja governance and the ideal for Daoist governance. Is there a point at which they correspond with one another?
Well, of course, what Zhuangzi and Daoism is talking about is what I call the regime of sincerity. That is kind of the actual cultural practice of this. But of course, if you read certain Confucian texts, even like in the Analects, right, there are passages where Confucius basically embraces some form of Wu Wei, right, and says, "Oh, I don't remember, it was Yao or Shun. He just sits on his throne and looks southward, and that's all that he needed to do." So there are elements in in Confucianism that also advocate forms of Wu Wei. And of course, if you look into the political philosophy, you can find all kinds of different kind of, let's say, forms of Confucianism that to a certain extent become very compatible with Daoism. But I think, again, what the Zhuangzi is talking about and reflecting on is similar to, again, what Freud does or what Nietzsche does on the actual cultural, concrete, socio-political and cultural consequences of the practice of this regime of sincerity. But my point was not to say that Daoist and Confucian philosophy are on principle incompatible. I don't think that's the case. There are many compatibilities between Daoism and Confucianism. You have Confucian texts that are also reflecting very much on the problems resulting from the regime of sincerity. I'm not saying Zhuangzi is the only one. You can find not similar, but you can find other kind of reactions to problems arising from the regime of sincerity. Also within the Confucian tradition. The Confucian tradition incorporates a form of self-critique, of course. Not only Zhuangzi does this.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a big problem. The perception that the Daoist texts are somehow a separate and incommensurable school of thought with the Confucian text, which is,
well, I mean, on the other hand, I think that you find too often, under the dominance of the Confucian discourse, it's too often said that Daoism is just some form of complement of Confucianism, and it's not really different from, right? So we have this kind of idea that the three teaching, the Sanjiao, that they are like the same thing, and that's often, I think, not very helpful for understanding what texts specifically like the Zhuangzi actually say. So I'm not saying they're incompatible. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm also saying, like, as a hermeneutic attitude, to basically subsume Daoism as some form of whatever Confucianism after work, right? As it is somehow done, right? When the Confucian comes home from work after the job, then he paints some Daoist paintings and reads some Daoist poetry, and in this way, it's all wonderful, the same thing. I think that takes away a lot of what we can actually find in Daoism.
Right. The next question, I think this person may have been mistaken. They're asking, why are you translating shi as sincerity? I can imagine you translated xin as sincerity, right?
Well, I don't translate any specific. If I would translate, I would translate cheng, right? The cheng as sincerity. But I'm not really translating any specific term as sincerity. I call it like a regime of sincerity. What I mean is this term is taken from from Lionel Trilling, who wrote a book on sincerity and authenticity in the 1970s. And he was, what I mean is sincere commitment to roles, building your identity through sincere commitment to roles. And I think we find this in many, many cultures, not only in China, not only in Confucianism, but basically all over the world. And so as a general umbrella term, that's what I mean with sincerity. I mean shaping your identity through sincere commitment to roles, which means, as I said in the presentation, through emotional and behavioral commitment. And there are many terms that speak to sincerity, whatever. In Western languages and in Chinese, and one of the core terms, but is cheng.
Can I say a few words? Because I don't think I make mistake. Because on the slide, 明者实之宾也. If you look at it, I think that's my impression. I don't know. 明者实之宾on that slide. it is sincerity. But maybe, yeah, that struck me straight away. I don't know. Then 明者实之病, in that sense, if you don't translate it as, what do you translate that then? 实.
Well, is a guest of actuality or reality? 病者实之病. How did I translate it? The guest of the actual, the name or role, Ming, either name or role, is the guest. Is the guest of the actual. So 是 in this is translated as the actual. 是being the guest of the actual. There's nothing to do, it's not.
All right, okay then.
Yeah.
Because
the name. This is slide number 4. I can share the screen again. Can you? Is the slide visible?
Yeah, we can see it.
Another one. It's a smaller.
And here's a sentence you're talking about, right? 明知是之病也. Right, and that's the translation is this one.
Oh, the actual.
Yeah.
Okay then. Right.
This is it.
But your follow-up question, maybe instead of simply restating your view of Roger Ames's role ethics, it might be interesting to hear what you have to say about, or to explain, because I think for some people it might not be clear about what your take on the Zhuangzi's relationship in kind of contradistinction to Roger Ames's role ethics. So I think some people might get the idea that you're. Some people might get the idea that you're saying the Zhuangzi is criticizing this or something, when in fact maybe you're presenting more of a critique.
Yes. So again, I think Roger's characterization of especially Confucian philosophy as role ethics, or Confucianism in general as a form of role ethics, is spot on. It's correct. It's the best, I think, description of Confucianism out there. So I agree with that. But of course, Roger is a Confucian himself, and he thinks, and he puts it this way, that, as I said in the presentation, and he writes this literally, individuals should not just play their roles, they should be their roles, right? And again, I think the Zhuangzi is saying no, and I'm taking on the position of the Zhuangzi. So I say the Zhuangzi says to Confucianism, and I say to Roger, hey, wait a moment. It's not a problem to play one's roles. It's fine playing one's roles. Now, so I agree with Roger's description of Confucianism, but I think, and I think that's what the Zhuangzi says, this being your role creates a lot of problems, and therefore, in order to, for therapeutic reasons, it's often better to simply play the role rather than be the role, and to understand rather that all roles are played.
Yeah, so maybe one way we could think of it, so one way maybe we could think about it is, rather than you presenting the Zhuangzi as if the Zhuangzi is against the roles, he's more critiquing the attitude one has towards taking on those roles.
Exactly. As I said, so I think the position is not that it's not an escapist position, nor is it a position that wants to somehow replace the roles with better roles, or to replace the roles with something better, right? Replace this form of civilization with a better civilization that is just different. I don't think that's the point. Again, that's why I'm referring to Sigmund Freud. Civilization is inescapable, and no matter what form of civilization we have, it will come with lots of pressures. There's nothing wrong as such with Confucianism. It's just, in order to, if you have this civilizational structure, you have to also have the means to kind of deal with the unease produced by this civilizational structure. And every civilizational structure will produce, that's what Freud says, and I agree with, unease. It's inevitable.
Right. Yeah.
It's impossible. It's impossible. I don't agree with the position that says Daoism has a socio-political program that will create a society where no unease exists. That is perfectly. That's like it's not an utopian vision.
Can I have
yes
a question?
please.
Professor Moeller, thanks for your lecture. I always is confused with the concept order. You know, for example, Eric Wegelin wrote a book with the title Order and History. How to distinguish order in Chinese context, for example, Daoism or Confucianism, and from the order in Western context, feel lots of yeah.
Thank you very much.
In Chinese, in Chinese, order always be translate as 秩序. So every Wegelin's book was translated to 秩序与历史. So how do you think about the order in so different contexts? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. Again, I use order as a very general term. And then, as I try to point out at the beginning, then you have very different suggestions as to how order is being produced. And these differ in different cultures. And then there you can find the differences between cultures, or for that matter, within China, you have different visions of order. And I said at the beginning as well that the order, again, it's a most general term. I'm just trying to use the term order and disorder as kind of the most basic distinction that is too general, that is not yet specific. And then every different philosophical school or every different culture or every different whatever historical period may come with its own concrete ways of describing what specifically constitutes order and what specifically constitutes disorder. So I do not use the term order as a specific cultural term, but as a general term. And again, I also think that order operates on very different levels, right? You can have an idea of that the cosmos is somehow being ordered. And you also have that in Greek philosophy, right? And even like whatever at the beginning of the Bible, Old Testament, kind of somehow God begins, creates the world by creating a certain order. So you find this everywhere. And then you can look at the specifics. And then if we look at China, at the Confucian project, you can see this very specific emphasis of order with regard to the Ren Lun, with regard to the human relationships. That this really becomes a central focus. But again, that's something that is then a form of order that is specific to Confucianism. Yeah. And then Daoism reacts to this and questions the orderliness of this order.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to just add to that. This past semester, our ECNU grad students class, I taught the 5 classics. And it was really astonishing, like every time I've taught that class, that almost every passage you come across, which generally might be read kind of more strictly philosophical, they are all defending a specific form of order. I mean, the socio-political implications they're not, I really hesitate to even call them implications. They're so explicit that,
yes.
And I think this is kind of people who argue for, this axial age period. It seems to be, as you mentioned, across the board, Aristotle's philosophy, how can you distinguish that from his political philosophy? His virtue ethics is indistinguishable or inseparable from his political philosophy. So that form of order, really, out of that emerges what might be considered virtue ethics for Confucianism, Confucian cultivation, and that sort of thing. But it's all baked into, or they're baked into each other, I guess, the notions of order and what we more typically think of as philosophical.
Right. That's a very good point in response to the question of the person from Fudan. I think I don't see, I have no glasses on. Right. So the order is a general thing. And then what you do, how do you define order, becomes the foundation for your ethics, becomes the foundation for your socio-political views, becomes the foundation for also whatever, your psychology.
And as you know from what I wrote in my dissertation, getting back to civilization, once that form of order becomes sanctified, then that form of order also becomes the basis for religious views, religions.
Right. Very much so.
So the next question, unless anybody else has a question they'd like to ask in person, or
may I ask a question?
Oh, yes. Sure.
Yes. Actually, I wrote 3 questions in the message line. I think I could ask them in person so that you can, connect them all. Thank you, Professor Moeller, for this insightful talk. I want to ask a question regarding your genuine pretending. Seems to be your central argument. So regarding this term, I want to ask from these 2 sides. So from the pretending sides, I want to ask, through your argument, you said you want to recognize the transitoriness of your roles. Everything is moving and the roles are not fixed. And you want to remove yourself a little bit from these roles. But in what sense is this distancing from these roles a form of pretending? I just get a little lost in understanding the connection between the transitoriness and the pretending part and the playing part of this side. And the other side is regarding the genuineness. So if I hear you correctly, you are saying through this pretending of attending these roles, you get some certain form of genuineness. In what sense are you talking about this genuineness? Is this but you said it's not in the subjectivity or self in any sense, but then in what sense of genuineness you are talking about? And then combining these 2 words together, I just want to ask, by juxtaposing these 2 terms together, I feel that there seems to be a more fundamental, paradoxical message that you really want to send. Is that true? I just want to ask for this central term. Yes.
Thank you very much. The questions are very good questions. So I didn't talk about the butterfly dream story. I suppose you're familiar. It's maybe the most famous story of the Zhuangzi, where Zhuangzi dreams and then turns into a butterfly. And for me, that also explains genuine pretending, right? In the sense that when we dream, we take on kind of a different personality. And yet our dreams are very much intensely experienced, right? Our dreams are very, like, again, from a Freudian perspective, you look at your dream to find out who you really are, right? The dreams tell more about you than your actual real life. But that's not the point I'm making. And I think the point I'm making is, just as in a dream, we kind of take on specific roles and take on specific persona, but they're of course extremely transitory, right? And we wake up and then we forget them, and we're something different. So in hindsight, from the outside, upon reflection, we can say that maybe throughout our life, and I think that's what the Zhuangzi is saying, we take on all these different persona, and while we're in this persona, we develop some form, like in a dream, some form of genuine identification with it, right? So and then whatever, I go and play football, play sports, and then I play this role, and I intensely identify with this role, and I enjoy it, right? This is how the enjoyment then, while I'm playing football, comes from. But it's very important that I can dissociate myself from this role afterwards, and so that I can teach a lecture, right? And then I can see that somehow teaching a lecture and playing football are all forms of pretending, in the sense of playing a specific role. And I can achieve some form of genuineness in each of this role. I can become a genuine teacher, and I can become a genuine football player. But I am none of this. None has priority over the other, right? I'm not more a football player than I am a teacher. So the genuineness is not something that comes from me, from my war, or from myself. The genuineness is something that I produce in playing the role well. But again, the important thing is that I don't over-identify with this role, that I don't try to play football when I'm teaching, or don't try to teach to be a professor when I'm on the football pitch, right? That would be horrible. I would be it would be a horrible person if I would play football as the professor, and and so the idea is that you can only become a genuine football player for 90 minutes if you do not insist on the role of a professor. So and the Zhuangzi is basically inviting us to understand our whole life in that way, to understand our whole life as a sequence of genuine pretending. Whatever we're doing right now, I am genuinely pretending to be a professor. And after this lecture, I'm going to do something else. And and to understand that this is the general condition of existence, that everyone is always genuine pretending. I think that's, as you said at the end of your question, that's my kind of core message, or at least that's how I should put it differently. That's what I understand to be the core philosophical insight of the Zhuangzi. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. May I ask another question?
Yes, please.
If nobody. I think your genuine pretending might be related to the concept that you previously talked a little bit about, you. As
right.
I recall, you
absolutely.
You as a form of existential vitality and intellectual sharpness,
yes.
rather than primitivism or nihilism, right? Could you explain a little more on those existential vitality and intellectual sharpness?
Yes. So I think if you understand that you're genuine pretending, then you understand, just like the butterfly in the dream. The butterfly in the dream is an expression of this xiao yao yo. And so the insight, the philosophical insight into genuine pretending, I think allows us to understand and to practice xiao yao yo, and to understand and to practice some form of an ming, being kind of okay with your fate. That's the two are complementary. Like the insight into genuine pretending, which provides the basis for achieving this state of xiao yao yo, or this state of ease when you're already in a state of civilization. Let me put it in a different way. When you're a child and you do child play, you do not need philosophy. You can achieve a state of xiao yao yo or an just by luck a lot of the time, simply when you're playing. Now, when we go through this civilization process, which everyone goes through, no matter in the West or in the East, there are just different kinds of civilization process. I think, again, that's what the Zhuangzi reflects to when we grow up. That's also in the Tao Te Ching, right? The childishness, the childhood is always seen as a place where we kind of naturally in a state of xiao yao yo. But through civilization, we become more and more bu'an because we always have to identify with these roles and so forth. So to understand this kind of childish condition is something that, at least momentarily, may allow us, now as grown-ups, we need the philosophy of genuine pretending. As children, we don't need them. But as adults, we need, under the pressures of society, we need philosophy. Again, I think that's the Daoist approach to philosophy. It's a medicinal, a therapeutic approach. I think the core for Zhuangzi is that philosophy allows us to achieve this kind of childlike state of an under condition of the pressures of civilization by understanding the existential condition of genuine pretending that we all exist under.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think Dimitra also had a question she wanted to get in there.
I have a question that do you think the term of sincerity means the transparency in West thought, like the Descartes' conditos, self-transparency, or the transparency soul in Rousseau's thought. Do you think there are some common points between the term in the Confucius and the sincerity in the West thought? My second question is that I know that you have studied Luhmann several years, and do you think there are some component between the thoughts of Luhmann and the Taoism of Zhuangzi? For example, the opposites.
Yes.
Do you think there are also other points between these two thinkers? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Yes, I said my short answer to both of the questions is yes. Again, as I said earlier, sincerity is a broad term, and I think that just means that you form an identity, you form a sense of who you are by sincerely committing to the roles you have. For instance, in the family, Confucianism, being sincerely devoted to your parents, right? And then we have lots of whole vocabulary. And that's the same thing, as you say, we have the same thing in Western culture before modernity in Europe. There's a strong emphasis on all different kinds of sincerely being a good person, becoming who you are by sincerely committing to various roles that you have. So again, I do think we find this kind of regime of sincerity in a different way also in Europe. It's nothing that is as such specifically Chinese. Secondly, yes, I do think that Daoism is an early that the autopoiesis, the idea of self-generation, is very central to Daoist cosmology or Daoist ontology, Daoist metaphysics, whatever you want to call it, the sheng sheng bu yi or sheng sheng bu xi, and this that is something that Luhmann is also central to Luhmann. Of course, then in very different contexts, he uses it for sociology and for modern society. So it becomes something very different. But yes, I do think that's a parallel. Another parallel is the critique of morality, right? The Zhuangzi is very much critical of moral communication, moral categories, and you find the same in Daoism. And you find this also in Luhmann. So that's been influential for my own thinking. On a more, on a kind of, what was the third thing that I wanted to say? I just escaped my mind. But sorry, I forgot now the third thing. I have but these two things are two things that that are kind of strangely similar, even though the philosophies are so far apart, or the theories are so far apart, and yet there are some very interesting parallels regarding, as you pointed out, autopoiesis, self-generation, but also regarding the critique of morality and a sort of amoral position. Oh, now I remember the third thing. I think both Luhmann and Daoism are somehow stoicism. There's a stoic element to both, and that is that's more in Daoism. It's more much more obvious, right? Stoicism in the sense like that we achieve an insight into how the world is and what we can do and what we cannot do, what can change and what we cannot change, and thereby again achieve some form of mental equanimity, some form of again. And interestingly enough, but that's much more hidden, but you find this also in Luhmann, that the point of theory is not so much to, to improve the world or anything, but in a Stoic sense, that why do we do theory? Why do we do philosophy? In order to through understanding, through intellectual understanding, achieve some form of an in this world. And I think that's something which much more hidden in Luhmann, but he speaks to it at a number of times explicitly. And that's a very, also kind of a third parallel between Luhmann and Daoist.
Thank you very much.
Great. Dimitra, you're up next.
Okay.
Hello,
Here
Dimitra.
I am.
Nice to
Hi,
see
Georg.
you.
Nice to see you too. I hope it's not too noisy. Yeah, I guess I will ask these kinds of questions, more like take them as a prompt, because I just want to hear what you have to say. So they are genuinely pretentious questions. So I will, my reaction was at some point when you were describing the Robert Zhi, was to think that you are a kind of Robert Zhi, in the sense that you are not an ideologist, but also in the sense that you are like robbing somehow all the naturalness out of Confucianism. And it sounds like it's a purely somehow constructivist project. And what I wrote in the chat was that 吃人 sounds like it's 吃人, right? Like eating people, we might say.
Yes.
And then what would be then the role of nature and naturalness in the Confucian emotion-based moral project? And is the implication that, of course, there is an ordering of emotions, right? The emotions are part of the general ordering. And would this ordering like go against this yu, right? Human impulses, or siyu? Or would it be like working with them towards some kind of an, which is like sui generis, we might say, Confucian kind of an, and how would that be distinct from a Daoist an? This is the question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm afraid the question is better than my answer to it or my reply to it. Yes, it speaks to something that I briefly that came up in the discussion a little earlier about the kind of overlap between Daoism and Confucianism that we find in Daoist and in Confucian philosophy. So, of course, I mean, the basic premise, or a basic premise that we have in Confucianism is that these roles, relationship, the Ren Lun, and again, especially the relationship between parents and children, which is always at the center. The same passage when I was talking to Rory, right? That this is just how it naturally is, right? That this relationship between parents and children is the most natural thing ever, right? It's natural in the sense of the word, right? That we're born into this and born with this. We're born as the children of our parents. What could be more natural than that? That is nature, like Greek, the Latin word, it means born, nature. And we have the same in Chinese, sheng, right? And so that's this idea of the net that the human relations, that the Ren Lun are founded in the essence of the natural, and that therefore the whole Confucian cultivation project is just a cultivation of the natural, which you have in Mengzi, right? You have all the stories of the Ox Mountain, and no, the Ox Mountain naturally grows in this way. And all that we do, the whole Confucian idea is that you just cultivate the natural, and that their whole kind of social ordering is actually just the cultivation of what's naturally there. And you allow, like you allow by caring for a plant, that you allow the plant to flourish. So the whole Confucian cultivation project, from that perspective, means you're basically allowing that which is natural to flourish. Now, again, theoretically, that's all wonderful. But the Zhuangzi is not reacting so much to the theory. That was the point that I was trying to make earlier. But he's reacting to the actual social constraints in society that you see everywhere around you in any society, wherever you are, if you're in Greece or in Germany or in China. You see that however beautiful the philosophy is, and however beautiful in theory the natural relation between parents and children, it's often comes with a lot of stress and with a lot of psycho and social pathologies, right? So Zhuangzi is not addressing and not questioning the wonderful narrative you find in the Mengzi. The Zhuangzi is addressing the socio and psycho pathologies that are kind of glossed over with this narrative, and the kind of like in Christianity, all the wonderful narratives, right? But it leads to extreme psycho and social pathologies, and that's what the Zhuangzi is addressing. That the narrative doesn't match the actual practice, and it cannot match it, and that the narrative therefore doesn't cure. We cannot find the cure for the social and psychopathologies created by the narrative in this narrative. We have to distance ourselves from these narratives if we want to address and find solace from the problems and the pathologies created by the narrative.
We have another question written down here that Dimitra's question kind of reminded me of it, because with this naturalist, oftentimes the Zhuangzi in particular is interpreted as promoting this sort of free and easy life that we're all dancing around. And there's the famous passage in the Lunyu where they're asking, what would you most love to do? And this disciple Dian says, he would like to go with his friends drinking wine from altar to altar, and it expresses this very naturalistic, and of course Confucius says 我与点也. So it's presenting Confucius as
he wants to swim
with this.
He wants to swim then, which is yo.
Okay, yeah.
Right? He wants to swim.
Does he?
In the water. This passage, Tian.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it's even.
But anyway,
right?
presenting.
So Confucius wants to be a Daoist.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like. So anyway, there's somebody asked the question: is Daoist ease, 乐感文化, or like feeling of happiness culture, which is kind of this is like a common and not necessarily wrong, but
no, it's not necessarily wrong. I mean, again, I didn't use the term le because I don't think like happiness, but of course it's it's not wrong, as you said. I mean, in Greek we have the notion of I hope I pronounce it somewhat correctly, eudaimonia, right? An idea of living well, an idea of kind of being to an extent being capable of feeling enjoyment, which is very difficult in life, right? So yes, generally yes, but I rather than le, I point to an and xiao yao yo as the more kind of specific Taoist terms, but yes. Generally, yes. The approach is therapeutic, and it's about achieving some form of mental and intellectual ease. Which is not exactly like happy-go-lucky, right? But it's that's a little bit too simplistic for it.
Yeah, and it seems like maybe that ease is a necessary condition to have true legan. Right, because you see people, for example, with like drinking. When somebody who is utterly depressed has a few beers, maybe a few beers too many, they don't look like they're having a good time, right? Whereas somebody who's maybe at ease in life and is pretty happy in life, when they have a few drinks, they're laughing and having a jolly good time.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up all the questions we have written in the chat box, but are there any last final questions for Professor Moeller?
There's one more in the chat. There's one more in the chat, Dan. I resent it from somebody. It's in Chinese.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, so he's asking. Yeah, he's asking Georg. They're asking you that if as a Westerner, as a Western scholar researching Chinese philosophy and Lao Zhuang thought, what sort of impact or influence has it had in your life?
Over the years, had a lot of influence. I mean, I think took very long time, but I think it both had like a sort of existential influence on me. I do think I see myself and my life in a somewhat more Taoist way eventually. But more obviously, I mean, like for instance, the book Moral Fool that you mentioned, which was written like more than 10 years ago, that's not about Daoism. It's about critique of contemporary moralism. But that's strongly influenced by Daoism, and even more so, which I regard as like central to my own work, the new book with Paul, You and Your Profile, which is not about Daoism at all, but we use a Daoist perspective and apply it not to a regime of sincerity, not to the ancient world, but we apply it to contemporary society. If you invite me for another talk, I could next year or so, I can point that out. But again, the Daoism has been essential for me, both on a personal level as well as on an intellectual level, in not talking about Daoism, but in formulating like a contemporary philosophy of identity. So I see myself strongly grounded, which is only natural, since I worked with the text and the philosophy for so long. I see it as very essential for how I see the world from a philosophical perspective, in the contemporary world philosophical perspective. So in this sense, I see myself as a neo-Daoist somehow philosophically.
Yeah, and he goes on to ask if if you've been to Guantai, which is where Lao Tzu wrote the Lao Tzu.
I'm not really that much of a how to say, what's the word? Like a tourist or so. No. And I'm not practicing. My practice is intellectual. My practice is not for many other people who do like whatever meditational practices or other kind of Daoist practices. But my practice is philosophical and philological and literary practice.
You're not at home doing practicing your neidan?
No, I'm not. But I'm not saying it's a wrong thing to do. It's just not my way.
Yeah. Well, great. So before I go and before I thank Georg once again publicly and on behalf of all the attendees, I want to just write down the name of his 2 YouTube channels.
Thanks, Dan.
One of them,
the second one is actually also on Bilibili. The Philosophy in Motion is actually also on Bilibili. Yeah.
Okay. So that's Bijan for everybody. Philosophy in Motion. But I guess it's the first one, the Carefree Wandering, that you're going to post the recorded video.
We didn't talk about it. If you allow me to, we may post it there. Yeah, if the recording turns out fine. Yes, we may do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if anybody here is interested in finding this video, unfortunately, YouTube can be difficult to access from here, but I think most people figure out a way nowadays. But those are the 2 YouTube channels. They're really great. They're informative and entertaining. Might be considered entertainment, or sorry, infotainment, right? Okay, thanks, Rory. So once again, on behalf of everybody, thank you very much, Georg, Professor Moeller. Oh, that's a tough habit to drop. For giving us your time and giving a very illuminating presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for all the questions and a great discussion. Thanks a lot.